What if freedom did not feel like a triumph but more like an exhale that came too late? What if the first steps after leaving something painful behind were the ones that wobbled the most? Elena wondered about that as she stepped out of her apartment into a Sunday morning that felt colder than the week promised. The air carried a faint smell of rain, though the sky held to its pale blue, and the street below hummed in its slow rhythm, as if the city had not fully woken up yet. She pulled her sweater tighter around herself and walked toward the bus stop with a small bag slung over her shoulder. It was the same one she carried during all the hard years before this new beginning, years that felt like wandering without knowing where she was going. She did not want to keep anything from that time, but somehow this bag had remained, not as a burden, but as a reminder that even in silence she never walked alone. She waited at the stop while a thin breeze moved the leaves across the pavement. A few people stood nearby with faces still soft from sleep. One of them was a woman with a burgundy scarf wrapped gently around her neck, her eyes thoughtful as she watched a small flock of birds cross the sky in a loose formation. Elena wondered if that woman felt the same quiet ache she carried inside, the tiredness that came after finally choosing freedom. She had left a relationship that was more shadow than shelter, and although she felt relief, something inside her had not yet caught up with the change. Yesterday, she saw a picture from the Moses series she had watched all week, the kind of scene that lingered, the moment when the people of Israel arrived at Sinai. They had made it through the sea, through the desert, through fear and hunger, through doubt and weariness, yet when they reached the mountain, they did not look like people who had. They looked like people who were still learning how to stand again. Elena understood that feeling more than she expected. The bus pulled up with a soft sigh and the doors opened as if offering a small welcome. She stepped inside and found a seat near the window. The woman in the burgundy scarf sat across the aisle. Her presence felt calm, as if she carried a quiet strength without trying. Elena leaned her head slightly against the glass and watched the city drift by. Storefronts still closed. A bakery where early workers stacked bread on wooden shelves. A man walking his dog with slow steps. Teenagers waiting for their coffees to cool. Everything looked ordinary, yet she felt like she was moving through her own private stillness. The woman across from her shifted slightly and pulled a small journal from her bag. She opened it to a page marked with a yellow ribbon and began to write, her pen moving gently as though she were pouring something tender onto paper. Elena wondered what kind of thoughts needed to be written on a Sunday morning, whether they were hopes or memories or the kind of prayers that did not need words spoken out loud. For a moment, her eyes drifted from the woman to the window where sunlight flickered across the glass. She imagined the Israelites at the base of Sinai. Dust on their clothes, the sound of wind rushing between the rocks, the sharp contrast between fear and awe in their chests. They were free. But freedom after years of heaviness did not feel like celebration. It felt like stepping into a calm that did not yet make sense. A soft tap on her shoulder brought her back. The woman with the burgundy scarf had leaned slightly forward. She held out a small wrapped mint. "You dropped this," she said with a gentle smile, though Elena had not dropped anything. The woman quietly added, "You look like you could use something sweet this morning." Elena accepted the mint with a quiet thank you. She wondered how a stranger could read her so easily. The woman nodded once, as if understanding, then returned to her journal. A small moment, simple and easy, yet it steadied Elena's breathing a little. Freedom was made of these gentle interruptions, the ones that reminded her she was not walking alone. The bus continued through the city until it reached the neighborhood where Mrs. Alvarez lived. Elena stepped off and felt the shift in the air. This part of town was slower. Old trees lined the streets and the houses had porches with wooden steps that creaked with age. She walked down the familiar path to a small home wrapped in vines that clung to the fence as if holding on to stories long told. Mrs. Alvarez lived in the corner house, the one with wind chimes that sang gently even when the air barely moved. Before Elena could knock, the door opened and Mrs. Alvarez stood there with a soft smile. The older woman always looked as though she had already been expecting her, as though her heart opened doors before her hands did. "You came," she said warmly and stepped aside to let her in. The living room smelled faintly of cinnamon and chamomile tea. Sunlight touched the edges of the floral curtains, painting soft patterns on the wooden floor. Elena settled into the familiar armchair while Mrs. Alvarez prepared 2 cups of tea with the slow, patient movements of someone who believed that small rituals mattered more than grand gestures. She brought the cups over and sat across from her. "You look lighter than last week," Mrs. Alvarez said with a thoughtful gaze. "But also like someone learning to breathe again." Elena nodded quietly. She did not want to unravel everything with words. Not yet. The older woman did not ask for more. She simply sat with her, allowing silence to do its work. For a moment it felt as if time slowed, as if they were sitting on holy ground without needing to know why. "When I think of your week," Mrs. Alvarez finally said, "I think of the people at Sinai. Free, but not quite steady. Loved, but still healing. God did not rush them, He spoke slowly. He reminded them first of what He had done before telling them what they would become." Elena let those words settle inside her. She thought of the image again. The crowd standing at the mountain, their faces lifted to a sky they still did not fully trust. How many of them carried memories of chains, whispers of fear, echoes of nights they could not forget? Freedom was not an instant transformation. It was the long breath after years of holding the lungs tight. Mrs. Alvarez leaned back slightly and folded her hands. "Do you know what I love most about that moment? God said He carried them on eagle's wings. Not pushed, not dragged, not scolded. Carried. With strength they could not see, with patience they did not understand. Sometimes freedom feels confusing because God brings you out before He teaches you how to walk again." Elena felt her throat tighten. She had left a place that felt like Egypt to her. A place where she had lost pieces of herself in trying to keep peace that never came. She thought freedom would feel like a sunrise. Instead it felt like early dawn, soft and gray, the kind of light that hinted at a day not yet shaped. She cupped her tea in her hands and breathed in the warmth. "I thought I'd feel stronger by now," she said quietly. Mrs. Alvarez smiled, warm and knowing. "Strength comes in the walking, not in the leaving." She paused before adding, "The Israelites did not feel new at Sinai. They felt tired. But tired people can still be held by God." Elena's eyes drifted to the window where sunlight touched the edge of a plant on the sill. She imagined what it must have been like to stand before that mountain, hearing God's voice speak into the stillness. Not commands first, not roles, but identity, a reminder of who they were, who He was, and what love looks like when it arrives after years of silence. She took a sip of tea, letting its warmth anchor her. "I guess I'm still in between," she whispered. Mrs. Alvarez nodded gently. "Most holy things happen in between." The older woman reached for a small woven basket on the table and pulled out an old postcard. On the front was an image of a mountain range washed in golden light. On the back were words written years ago, faded but clear enough to read. It was a verse from Exodus, the promise God gave at Sinai. Elena traced the edges of the card with her fingers. "He carried them on eagle's wings," she said softly as she read the words. Mrs. Alvarez smiled again. "And He carries you too." The room grew quiet. Not empty, but full in a gentle way, as if something unseen had settled between them. The older woman closed her eyes for a moment, as though listening to a memory only she could hear. "Freedom is not about running away," she whispered. "It is about learning to walk with God when you don't know the landscape yet." Elena felt something shift inside her. Not loud. Not dramatic. Something like a feather settling, a softness landing where there used to be tightness. The woman on the bus offering a mint, the quiet streets, this warm home, Mrs. Alvarez's steady presence. These were not coincidences. They were small pillars of cloud and fire on her journey, guiding her with gentleness she had not known before. She stayed for another hour as they talked about life and the slow work of healing. When she finally stepped outside again, the sunlight had grown warmer. The breeze carried the scent of the nearby bakery, and the faint sound of wind chimes danced behind her as she walked away. On the bus ride home she thought of Sinai again. The people had not reached the promised land, but they had reached a place where God wanted to speak to them. A place to rest, listen, relearn. She realized maybe she had arrived at her own kind of Sinai. Not an ending, a beginning that did not need to hurry. As the bus rolled through the streets, The woman with the burgundy scarf was no longer there, but the mint remained in her pocket like a reminder that even a stranger's kindness could carry the echo of God's gentle leading. Elena leaned back into her seat and let her eyes close as the city moved quietly around her. And somewhere in that quiet she began to pray. Not with words spoken out loud, but with the steady beat of her heart learning a new rhythm. God, carry me the way you carried them. Teach me how to walk in this new place. Heal what still trembles inside me. Let freedom feel like something I can hold. Amen. She opened her eyes again to the world passing by and felt a small peace settle in. The same words returned to her like a whisper rising on the breeze. He carried them on eagle's wings. And he carries you too. If this spoke to your heart today, hold on to the reminder that freedom does not have to feel perfect to be real. And as you step into the week ahead, may you remember that God leads gently, patiently, and with a love that always knows the way home.